Members of the squad continuing their temper tantrum over Joe Manchin opposing Build Back Better. And right on cue, they're playing the race card.
It's tremendously frustrating for me as a black man in America because, once again, it's an example of Joe Manchin as a white man showing that he doesn't care about black people, he doesn't care about Latinos, he doesn't care about immigrants, he doesn't care about women, and he doesn't care about the poor.
Ugh. CNN pushing the race war. Zucker should be fired on the spot. And the White House doesn't seem to be too concerned with the attacks coming Manchin's way.
Is there going to be a softer, I guess, approach in dealing with Senator Manchin and some of the other, Democrats in the party who have been very vocal about being disappointed in him? Is there sort of a shift in strategy since this all blew up over bullying?
Well, again, I wouldn't characterize it that way, Jackie, but I would tell you that Senator Manchin is somebody who has won many tough fights in West Virginia, and I would doubt he's a withering flower on the side of the road.
So, Jesse, I'm going to use a golf analogy because I understand you enjoy that sport, but it's like the left media hacks and CNN. They only have one club in their golf bag, right? And they're trying to play 18 holes with one club, and it's a sand wedge called race. And anytime something goes bad, that's the club they whip out.
I think that analogy was straight down the middle of the fairway, Gutfeld. But you're right, what you said at the top, there is a race war brewing within the Democratic Party. It's going to backfire spectacularly, and I can't wait to watch it. What kind of tactician slanders someone as being a heartless white bigot for not voting the way they should vote? I mean, what are they going to push Joe Manchin into the arms of the Republican Party so the Democrats don't have a majority in the Senate? They can't confirm judges for the entire year next year. You don't smear someone you're trying to persuade. It's just idiocy. Joe Manchin's, I think, at 60% approval rating in one of the reddest states in the country. Trump won it by 40 over Joe Biden. There's like, what? I think there's like half the state is under the poverty level. Like 20% of the state is under the poverty level. Now, I looked at Bowman's district, New York 16. Average salary there, $75K. Average salary in West Virginia, $45K. Average house in Bowman's district, $500,000. Average house in West Virginia, $100,000. There's actually more whites than blacks in Bowman's district, this squad guy. And it's not a stone's throw away from a very famous person's lake house near Westchester County. So I don't know where he's getting off acting like he represents the most impoverished district in the country. Manchin's just fine. He was put there to represent the people of West Virginia, not to vote with the squad. He's voting with his people, not his party, and that's how it should be.
Dana, I think the word of the day is demand. If you don't have a huge majority, don't demand stupid things. And I think that's what happened. What the squad does is they made unreasonable demands that jarred with the reality of the Democrat predicament in the Senate. It wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. The squad cracks me up. They have such little self-awareness. It's like Michael Scott level self-awareness. They think that them going after Joe Manchin is going to hurt Joe Manchin. That's hilarious to me. There was an article in The Hill today by, I think, Alex Bolton, in which he quoted several staffers saying, well, what needs to happen is Joe Biden just needs to get really tough with Joe Manchin. He needs to take him by the collar and shake him and tell him. I'm like, you think that's going to work? Joe Biden's popularity in West Virginia is probably less than, and I can't even imagine what the number actually is. So they are doing themselves a huge disservice, of course. But what you said, Greg, is what they should have done, which is to say, Biden could have said, I know that we wanted to do all of these big things. And thankfully, we got the Senate, but we only have it by 2. So therefore, let's scale back our plans. Let's focus on, and they would probably be like, at 55% approval right now. Instead, they're just spiraling downwards.
Yeah. Harold, you're a bright man. Some say almost as bright as me. Could you argue that the squad provides a beneficial role by delineating the moderates in the party. They make everyone else look sane by being there, so the Democrats don't mind having the squad, you know, throwing a tantrum now and then. What do you think of that?
You know, there's some truth to what you're saying. I think Democrats, we ought to sit back. When Jesse Waters gives incredibly, I think, insightful advice about how we should talk about race and how we shouldn't talk about race, we should be paying attention. The White House should have defended Joe Manchin. He's no racist.
Right.
What the country wants, Democrats, Republicans alike, is more action and more results, and not the kind of actions. Now, they're extremists in both parties. I think the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the squads and all, they kind of canceled themselves out. And what we really need is a serious conversation around the things affecting most Americans. Congressman Bowman, you know, he's upset about this Build Back Better not passing. I think the better way to exert himself and assert his energy is to figure out what is bothering people like Joe Manchin, Democrats, who represent people whom need a lot of what's in this bill. Why is it that Joe Manchin can't support it? Sit with him, understand, and negotiate and compromise. The whole notion, the nation, the predicate of our nation is built around compromise. And I think some on both sides of the aisle forget that. But I think the White House did a disservice to Senator Manchin by not defending him. He's not a racist. You may disagree with his policy, but he's not a racist.
Yeah, you know, Katie, we can't let CNN get away with this because this wasn't figurative language. This was literal language that they always foment whenever they get the chance. And you'd think this network would have learned a lesson about creating racial conflict, but any opportunity that they can find, they're going to gin it up for clicks. And I guess that's their profit model, race war.
One, to try and scare people into accepting their agenda based on non-factual information. So Hispanics are leaving the Democratic Party in droves and going over to the Republican Party for the exact reasons that Joe Manchin cited about not voting for Build Back Better because of inflation and the economy. So Democrats should actually be thanking Joe Manchin for maybe saving some of Joe Biden's legacy on the economy, because the bill didn't pass and won't impact the economy as it maybe would have if it did pass. But for years, the squad has been living beyond its political means, and they've been able to do that under Biden because Biden has been appeasing them. And he's chosen a side here. You know, moderate Biden is the one still throwing Joe Manchin under the bus. He's not defending him. His White House press secretary saying that, you know, attacks on him are essentially perfectly legitimate. There wasn't a condemnation when protesters showed up at his house in D.C. and, you know, walked him to the car. And it's not just Joe Manchin. You remember when Senator Sinema was chased into the restroom by activists and filmed in the bathroom? And Joe Biden was asked about it, and he just kind of laughed it off and smirked and said, oh, well, it's just part of the job. Biden and the administration have taken a side here, and it's not with Joe Manchin, which is why Republicans are trying to get him to switch parties.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.